The Haunted PS1 Demo Disc is a great way for small devs to get a little exposure. It's known to hold some high-quality demos, and part of that is due to the curation process. It's quite the difficult task because there's just so many awesome demos and only so many spaces. So I'm making this video because I wanted to shine a light on some of the games that didn't quite make it. This video will be covering the games that didn't make it past round 1. We split curation into rounds because there were 70 submissions to the Demo Disc 4, and asking everyone who's volunteering their time to make this happen play all 70 is a bit much. So instead, we split everyone into teams of 2, and then have them tackle 7 games each. Both members give their thoughts, a yay or a nay, for any reason, and if both give a nay, 1 or 2 other curators will come behind them just to validate or maybe challenge their verdict. We really wanted to give every game their best chance to win, but at the end of the day, getting on the demo disc is a competition, so not everyone can. With that peek into the process, let's look at the 27 games in round 1. Aries Breeze by Pytor is a mixed bag. Visually stunning. This is a unique survival horror where you're stranded inside of a mech, and you must maintain your oxygen and other meters while trying to contact home base to save you from the ruins of an old base. The movement is slow, and I'm mixed on this because the weight of each step helps sell the clunky nature of your mech, but the environments are so big, and the slow pace you move threatens to turn this into a meditative experience. Speaking of clunk, this game is very difficult to get into. While moving around with the left stick is your bread and butter in this game, sometimes you'll be asked to interact with things using the right stick, and even more seldom, hunker down to fire your gun at droids. There is a scanning feature, which I think is meant to highlight stuff that you can interact with. It's a neat diegetic way of doing that, but annoying to constantly press that button every few steps. On the other hand though, the game's visuals, while very atmospheric, make figure out where you can go and what you can interact with often difficult to decipher. It's not hard to wander off screen somewhere you were never meant to go and get lost in the void where the cameras don't go. And that's not even including the times where you clip through the environment because the movement appears to be IK based, which also seems to be why you use the right stick to grab things, because that's also IK based? I don't know, I think a simple button press to interact with things and a run button would go a long way to improve the experience. The oxygen feels like it drains so fast you hardly get time to explore and figure things out, which reinforces the core idea of being stranded on a desolate, hostile world, but it doesn't make for a fun game. Speaking on death, I died further in and got banished to the Shadow Realm, as opposed to the other times I died in the intro where it just reset me to the beginning. I guess that's where I settle at the end of the day. There is a lot of passion going into this game. It's playing to the devs' unique tastes. It's one of those games where I think there's going to be a few select players who share these tastes, and it clicks with them. But for the rest of us, this is better absorbed through a video essay. If the game wants a wider audience though, the game will probably need better tutorialization at the start. It took me like 3 deaths before I figured out I was running out of oxygen. You can imagine my frustration when I just keel over a minute after landing. I think on-screen UI to match the audio cues could help players understand what's going on, because if I'm not mistook, the "you got mail" bleep is the same as the "you're about to die" bleep. Just this generalized warning to check your systems. I think cleaning up the levels and not letting the player wander outside the camera could also help too. I don't know. Like I said when I started this one, I feel mixed about it. Awake was made by Crybaby Studios, and is about a girl going to Awake, really feeding off that experience of being at a family gathering where you know none of the family. Though the horror of this comes in that you are being sacrificed so the elders may live on through you, or at least that was my interpretation based on the photos that look just like you, and the ending with the hand reaching. The game has potential, but in the state I played it in, it was super rough. The major issue is when you attempt to use an item on a problem, if you pick the wrong item, the game freezes, or more, your inputs stop working. Speaking of being forced to exit the game, every time you hit a game over, the text crawl at the end is so terribly slow that it's literally faster just to alt-tab out and reset the whole thing. Luckily, it does save your progress after each step, at least luckily until you don't know where to use the Molotov, which has a timer on it, and the game didn't really expect you not to use it, so it'll save, and then you softlock yourself from the ending. Thankfully, they left the dev tools in there so you could drop a new Molotov and fumble until you figure out what they wanted you to use it on, which is the door. Speaking of that door, It's kind of annoying just to have a game over door, mostly when the game over is so long. I think if they allowed you to skip the text or just had the whole thing reveal and a button press to move along, that would probably be better. Little other things, the camera sometimes doesn't trigger, and you'll need to stumble about to find the next trigger. And last but not least, the game itself feels like a complete story, and I'm not really sure where it would go from here. I could imagine that there's a bigger version of this game that would be the exact same, just with a bigger house and more puzzles. As it is, it's a cool little experience if you can look past the bugs. Blink by Lamington Games is one of the more arcadey titles. Essentially, some dude asks you to go to a place to collect an item, and one way or another, keeping your eyes open or shut ensues. It takes a minute, but once it clicks that this is more of a puzzle game than a horror game, getting through becomes a lot easier. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. There are still tense moments in each level, but the bite-sized nature of each level, the coins to collect, the extra hidden book, it all points to a game with a level select to go back to and perfect a level. Get all the collectibles, beat the speedrun time, which are mysteriously absent from the demo, but perhaps those are things that are planned to be put into the full game. On the other end, more of a through line between levels could be nice too. This feeling that each thing you were collecting is working towards a greater goal. As is, they all kind of feel random and disjointed. Blood, Blood, Blood by Midnight Mirage Softworks is a first-person shooter. You wander around till you find enemies, they shoot at you, and if you aren't careful, they'll overwhelm you fast, so it's best to pick them off from a distance. The rate of fire feels awful. It makes missing an ordeal because you gotta wait seconds before you can shoot again. I suppose there isn't much to say on this one. The only level available is the jungle, where you cross a bridge, enter a temple, press 2 buttons to unlock some doors, and then the game ends. And if you've played any FPS, especially any retro-inspired FPS, then you know exactly what you're getting into, and you can kind of look and see if this world and setting will interest you. A big negative right now is jumping. I feel like I got caught on every wall, and I'd wager the dev didn't make a player physics material with the friction turned off, because when you don't do that, you get stuck on walls when jumping, and it feels bad. I think they have a solid groundwork here. From what I heard from some of the curators, the AI actually went from being really stupid to really smart, and there's good programming work here, but it just needs more juice. Something to make it stand out. Then we had Blood Orange by Semicolon. It's another complete jam game that got submitted to the demo disc. And like the last one, it's a great experience. Highly recommend playing it, but again, not a demo. You play like a depressed diver, diving into the ocean to take photos of fish, mostly. Like any good psychological horror, it too has you physically descending deeper and deeper as you draw closer to that what torments you. Which is your wife, the purest form of torment, I suppose. A love you couldn't keep a promise to. There are 4 endings, maybe 3, 2 if you want to be harsh. The in-water ending, the leave ending where you choose to forget, the leave ending where you choose to remember, and the leave ending where you actually move on. I feel the leave endings are all about the same with just a minor detail change, which is fine, but I didn't have it in me to replay the entire game for such minuscule differences. Thankfully, Button Bash Bros went to the trouble. It's a mostly linear game, dive, progress, resurface, dive again, until the very end where you need to collect keys. Those keys summon an evil dolphin who will wreck your shit. Along the way, you get to talk to some less evil dolphins, and your conversations with them will determine your ending. But they're quite esoteric, and how they affect the end is unclear unless you ask the developer directly. Again, awesome short game, well told, and it's free. If you like Silent Hill 2 or Signalis for its story and you just need like a half-hour fix, this game's fucking got you. Celestial Rescuers 2, Zero Mission, by Indy Jessindel, seems to be a roguelite of sorts, where you spawn into a galaxy, travel to different worlds, each presenting 3 possible missions, well, 2 missions with 4 difficulties, and after a while it goes back down to 1 mission with 3 difficulties, because one type is racing and one type is combat. Racing takes longer than combat and isn't significantly easier, so you always just choose combat when given the option. Unless all the other options are the hardest combat difficulty, in which case there's just too many dudes to take care of. Completing missions nets you experience. I'm not really sure what leveling up does, but once you save or fail all the planets, a wormhole opens up to the next galaxy, and you're presented with a minimal upgrade, like 8% shields. I got about 6 galaxies deep before I gave in. Upgrading is always a fun treat, but the process is very slow. I think this kind of game needs a lot more variety of missions, or progression should be way faster, and I think an overarching threat would also push the players forward, because right now it has like an XCOM feel where you feel like you should take on riskier missions for a bigger reward, but without that endgame threat, the risk isn't really worth the effort, though there is little cost if you fail, it seems. It's not strictly advice, but I think an upgrade after every world would feel better, and the challenge rating would determine the pool of upgrades. Like at risk 1, it's only a 1% upgrade, but at risk 4, it's like a 10% upgrade. Overall, this game's pretty fun. It just has the potential to be a lot more fun, but to get there, it needs, more content, essentially. And probably an overarching goal, like something to work towards, because right now, just saving people for the sake of saving them, Cold Boot by Int45 was actually a game from Advent 4. It's pretty cool to see it back 5 months later. Let's take a look to see how it's improved. Well, the UI sways with the direction you move. That's pretty cool. And the UI itself has been changed. A little less old school clunky, but sleeker and easier to read. They took out the reload function, which feels better since your brain is focused on moving fast and firing. Gun and monsters seem a little darker to fit the world's lighting better, and that's all I really noticed. Maybe most of that development time was spent on the campaign, and it just didn't end up in the demo. I think if they wanted to end up on the demo disc, they were going to need to finish up that campaign and texture the monsters, and maybe add a second gun or a third gun to vary out the gameplay. The Endless mode still has the problem where you reach a point around like wave 9 and 10, where there are just more monsters than ammo you receive, and I think for the Endless mode, they should perform a check of how much ammo the player has, and drop more whenever they're getting low to like, maybe 10. Or they could add a melee weapon, or just give the pistol infinite ammo, cause it's kind of boring to circle strafe around for 2 minutes waiting for another 20 bullets to drop. And it's not hard to avoid the monsters, so I ended up with 700 health before I gave up, and it took them so long to kill me just standing there. I'm still excited to see the campaign someday, but there's still a lot of cooking to do. Echoes of Decay by Budget Unicorn Studios feels like someone's early attempts at survival horror. There is a lot of charm in that fact. Like, there's little things I can nitpick, but overall it's competent. It just lacks that spark. The game feel isn't quite there yet. There's a lack of feedback on most things, like taking damage. The most frustrating part for me was getting locked into a corner where I couldn't see, and then dying in silence. Personal nitpick, but I could just never get used to the controls. I kept wanting to press X to run and A to interact, but they're backwards. I think part of it is the story doesn't hook you either. You're an amnesiac military man in a hospital that has been abandoned due to a Resident Evil style outbreak. And then you just kind of wander a couple of rooms until you get to outside into the city, fight a big spider, and it's over. Overall, I just say this needs more time to bake. Their core systems are pretty solid. They just need to polish the hell out of it. Godbeast Saga by Daskumaru wears its Shadow of the Colossus and Journey inspirations on its sleeve. You play little guy riding winged beast and must travel forwards to castle. Why you are doing this is not very clear. On your journey you meet small monsters who trap you in an arena circle and you must defeat them to continue. Along the way you'll come across bells and you'll ding them. At one point your path is blocked by bells, so you gotta go ding some other bells to open the way, but a big monster comes out and you fight it till it dies. Then you're allowed to cross the bridge, and that's the end of the demo. The scope of the game is really impressive. The wide open vistas are really cool. I think if you want a semi-meditative experience roaming open fields, this game's got you. But I wasn't really vibing with that, and the combat between walks is a little tedious. But I feel like the worst aspect was how I didn't really know where the game would go after this. Like, what is going to keep it interesting? Will it just be new vistas to look at, or like new monsters to see? Maybe a small change in how you fight a beast? The demo didn't really make me excited for more. I think the game lacks player motivation. Like in Shadow of the Colossus, it's reviving a girl by sacrificing beasts, and in Journey, it's piecing together the small clues it gives you. And I just don't feel like I got anything out of Godbeast Saga from a story perspective. It's a neat experience on its own, I don't think it's a good demo that enticed me for more game. Huntsmen by Hermit Mode is a game where you play what I imagine is the titular huntsman arriving at a structure to perform a sacrifice. The first thing you interact with spouts a lot of flowery words that feel more directed at the player than the character you're playing, and then a tower spawns, and suddenly you're swarmed. You fall over and die. And when you die, the game boots you. So I reopen the executable and notice there's some text at the bottom. Controls. After a moment of figuring out what my interactions with this world will be, I find a gun. Nice! And before I can do more, I am swarmed again. But this time, shooting the gun blindly while I writhe around seems to get me out of that tight spot. So, gun it is. I walk forward and re-trigger that intro cutscene to spawn the tower again. And here's where I learn that you cannot skip the cutscenes, which is unfortunate. They aren't long, but having to watch them every death is tedious. That said, the tower seems to do nothing. So you press on, see what looks to be a collectible, maybe money or something. Touching it though turns you into crystal, and you die. Reset, pull out the gun, kill swarm from a distance. Awesome! This gun is a godsend. Decide to skip the intro tower spawner and just push forward. Come across a keywind that seems to blow up? Okay. Trying to figure out if I did anything, I fall forward into a new arena where there's a statue that has blurred genitals and tits. Why not? There is a switch on the other side which causes another interesting cutscene to play. The chessmen give me Mirror Mask vibes. In fact, all the cutscenes kinda have, and I love that. The chessmen want you dead, but thankfully, the gun makes quick work of them. Unfortunately, one of them spawn a new horror that makes a beeline for you, and the gun doesn't seem to be effective on them at all. So they reach you, and you die, and you're booted. I wish I could tell you about how I triumphed over this beast, but after 4 times of getting booted, walking all the way there, watching the cutscene, and doing the same fight with no new knowledge, I figured it was time to step away. The demo's cutscenes are incredible. I would love to see more of this world and what weird stuff it has to offer, but the gameplay half is too abrasive for me. I don't mind there being danger in combat, but I kind of feel like you need a checkpoint system. The world was so interesting that I really want to get into this one, but I'm not a big fan of like Souls-like difficulties, and so it kind of pushed me away. The Hypnic Chain by Grim Baccharis is a LSD simulator-inspired game where you wander around environments and sometimes talk to people, find items, erase entities, all just trying to progress further. But eventually you'll load into a level that's missing a skybox. Thankfully, you can just copy one of the other skyboxes and rename it to what it's seeking, though it does sort of spoil the atmosphere of that level. There's this locked door you come across, and after some wandering, you'll come back to it just to see if maybe it'll unlock now. And it does, leading you into a secret lab. Things are progressing just fine. You find a key, you unlock a door, you use a computer terminal to unlock another door, but then you find yourself trapped in the room. Like, I think the door that led me in needed the same key to get out, but it took my key when I was coming in. I don't know. But that's where my story ended. The movement is jank, and it's not hard to freeze the game up because you're looking the wrong way during some dialogue. It's a neat little dream sim, but a janky one that had too many crashes for my taste. Mango 64 by Spectrum Studios is the toy we have at home. From the little digging I did, this seems to be the dev's first released project, and I think for a first go, it has a lot going for it, but it's kind of held back by a lack of polish that experience brings. I'd say the biggest setback is the inconsistency in which you double jump. Sometimes you just don't. I don't really know what causes this, because while I could get it to happen in the same spot, I couldn't really replicate the glitch in other similar spots. Also, the jumps are really tight, especially at the end of the first level, turning this game almost into a precision platformer, which I personally don't love. One thing that helps this game stand out from Tori, and works the most consistently, is a swing mechanic. It feels good. And while it would be nice to have some visual feedback to know when you're in range, generally, they're the smoothest aspect of this game. The aesthetic is pretty well done, the enemies look good. I do think Mango could stand to be remodeled. The devlog mentioned they had never modeled before Mango, so they followed a tutorial from a fellow of the server, the Sickly Wizard, the Spiteful Crow if I had to wager a guess, and it does end up looking very similar to it, but again, first time modeling, I'm not holding that against them. I think the game could be a nice little gem, but I also feel like it needed a lot of ground up reworking to get there, like a faster sprint, higher jumps, consistent jumps. The swing is good as is. I know the game is inspired by Tori, but without more to make it its own, I think it'll always live in Tori's shadow. M.E.A.T, Malleable Entropy at Task by My Dog Stole My Liver is a strange little experience. You're plopped to a map and tasked with setting up drones, and after about 3, you'll be told that you failed. Parentheses, good ending. I played through it twice, as the ending comes so suddenly you think there's an invisible timer, but the second time I was much faster, and it ended at the same spot, so I'm inclined to believe it was on purpose. The visuals are crunchy and cool, and there's some humor I really enjoyed. Meet Angelus. But it doesn't really feel like a demo to a fuller game, and if it was, I don't know if I'd want to play more of wandering around a meat dungeon. Small update, when the dev was told about their status of making it on a disc or not, they said it was a long shot not being a demo. They also told us they're going to put this little ribbon on their itch.io page. It's very funny. Norowareta, The Three Treasures by Studio Crying Spider opens with a very interesting, albeit kinda long cutscene that doesn't really set up the who, what, where, and why this game is happening. To my understanding, we are a Finnish girl traveling to Japan, visiting a shrine that leads up to a cave, where we pick up a tag and then are transported to the place in the opening cutscene / dream we had. From there we wander about for like half an hour or so, picking up a bunch of tools that are ultimately not required for this game, as the demo ends when you pick up the first treasure, which allows you to see the evil spirits that the items allege to counteract. Story-wise, it has Fatal Frame vibes, more about the history of the place you're in than the current character, though there's a high probability they'll have parallels to one of the past characters, probably the one that wants to travel the world. The environment designer went off! Maybe a little too much in that opening area, as my computer began crying from how hard all the foliage was making it work, but everything looked great underneath the heavy pixelation filter. I would have loved the option to remove that to appreciate the art even more, but you know, the vision. The game is pretty tense for the first portion when you're expecting there to be a monster to avoid. Really what kills the tension is this stick tool you need. I missed it on my first pass through the room, and so I ended up backtracking all up and down every room looking for what I missed, taking what might have been a 30-minute experience to an hour. That 30 minutes spent wandering the same halls over and over really killed the atmosphere and pacing, though had I found it the first go, I might have missed the room with all the story notes in it. The game promises 2 more areas at least to cover the 2 other treasures, and it also promises that there will be ghosts to combat, but I kind of feel like this demo should have had at least 1 ghost encounter, because a major component of the core gameplay loop is just kind of missing from this demo. And so it's not particularly reflective of the game as a whole. Will the ghosts inject fear back in, or will they be a tedious nuisance to navigate? Only way to know is to play the full game. Omega Park by R.T. Warner is a classic point-and-click adventure, even including having to swap what option you want to perform. The game starts with this guy watching TV in his trailer, and wanting to interact with the world, you'll find a remote and turn off the TV, which prompts the character to tell you to return the videotape. So you grab it, and we're off to the video store. After a lot of time of wandering, because you don't know that you're looking for a bus stop when you first start walking about, but once you figure that out, you can head off to the video store, where you work your way to returning and grabbing a new tape. And since you're already out, you start to explore a little. There's a convenience store, a laundromat, and a diner. Interesting note that I've seen all of these locations in other games. I didn't know they were from an asset pack. Not to knock on this game, the assets all work really well here. The purple fog really makes them feel cohesive. Plus, with what little time you spend at each locale, it'd be a huge undertaking to model all these environments. And each location basically only has one thing to do. At the laundromat, it's dynamite. The convenience store has matches. The video store is for renting public domain cartoons. And the diner is to get some money. I managed to get 2 endings, one at the diner where you're for dinner, and the one in the mines. Oh, did I mention the mines behind the trailer park? Your neighbor Carl thinks his dog wandered over there and needs you to find them. Luckily, you have that dynamite, but getting on the elevator behind the rubble ends the demo. It's a very neat demo, it has lots of style, but the big open environments and slow walking speed are killer. Like, I spent 30 minutes in my first run and 10 in my second, and most of that's just traversing from point to point. A double click to run would be a godsend, and maybe clamping the bounds too, I think the laundromat has the best bounding. It's very wide open, but it doesn't let you very far outside of where you're supposed to be, unlike most every other location where you can run all over. The game is very player driven. It doesn't give you much in terms of goals. Steve only really tells you to return your tapes. Everything else you gotta figure out on your own, which makes the game feel kind of aimless. Someone mentioned this feels like a tech demo, and I felt that. I think a lot of time was probably spent getting all these systems to work seamlessly, and I think now that they have the foundation, they can focus on content. Petrichorus by Cuttlefish is an extremely short RPG maker type game where you, Puck, arrive on an island to do something. A pilgrimage of sorts? The writing is very esoteric and poetic, though maybe I missed the line that is more explicit with your goals. You move a cursor around to find interactions like a point and click, and I'm mixed on that because while it makes the game feel unique, it's also the source of the most frustration. To start, where the interactions are not clear, so you just kind of have to waggle the cursor around looking for highlights. And then second, on larger screens, you have to slowly scroll the camera to where you want to go, click, and then the camera snaps back to the character, and then you have to watch them slowly wander over to the point of interest. And it had me thinking, why not just let me move the character themselves? I feel like I'm traversing screens twice. Of which, this demo only really has like 6 screens, 8 if you include the 2 rooms, 9 if you include the intro river, where you mostly walk, witness, and at the end interact with things, then die to a forest fire in your mind. The end card says there'll be a really unique battle system, but I really wish that the demo itself had that battle system, you know? Because as is, I don't really get how it's going to function out of this demo. In the end, I think this has a lot of potential to be interesting when it's complete, but there wasn't really enough here to latch on to. Pickin Treasures is by Terra Sophiedev, a game where you play a cat who's collecting fruit from a strange planet to make a delicious fruit salad. Gameplay-wise, you just kind of walk about, find the fruit, and tell your robot to take it back to the ship, and then you ring a bell to distract the evil robots. You do this about 6 or 8 times, and then the demo ends. There was an update that added gates that you could hit with your big sword, but otherwise, I don't really have a ton to say on it, because it's such a bare-bones experience. Planet Scanners by Ham Goblin and Phoenix Williams is a job sim a la Papers, Please. At least in the sense that you need to make enough money to keep going. Your goal is to scan planets for a corporation, because finding a planet means you own it and its resources. So you go to this terminal, which is unwieldy to use because only the arrow keys and enter work instead of WASD and E. Move your telescope over to a star, lock it in, and then move over to this other terminal to see if the star has any planets. You scan a planet, you get $1, and then a lot of curators ran into this hiccup where there was nothing on the left-hand side, which meant that you couldn't upload the planet to the main computer. And since that never shows up, it kind of rendered the game unplayable for everybody. But it was one of those things where nobody really knew like that was supposed to be there. Unfortunately, that was where I got all my footage from, but they did send an update through that fixed that bug. And while it's great that the bug is fixed, and I could meet it on its own terms, I can still see like why it didn't get pushed through. I get why it skips days for the sake of the demo's pacing, but I feel like doing so hurt the core loop of scanning planets and getting upgrades. Like, don't get me wrong, I still think this could be enjoyable as a complete game where it's balanced around going through every day, but this version wasn't. So after day 1, you skip to day 7, which introduces a ping mechanic, which you're meant to use to find like alien life. But all it seems to do is add time onto your chore list without compensating you in any kind of way. You know, just like a real capitalist job, I suppose. But also, it feels like you could just ignore the step because there wasn't really anything worth hearing that day. And then it skips to the next day, which I think was like 13 or something, I don't remember. But anyway, this third and final day, you receive a rent bump, which is a bummer, and then you find alien life, and then the game ends. Raige by Chase Williamson is a game that attempts to explore a grim world where the inhabitants must do depraved things to stay alive. The titular character, Raige, is contracted to take lewd photos of girls for a mysterious benefactor. And the game starts with Raige finding a new girl of dubious age, which attracts the attention of the mysterious benefactor so much they request the girl to be brought in exchange for a massive payout. Raige is hesitant, but elects that the security this payout will afford is worth the girl's life, and takes her. The demo ends after it implies the horrible things the mysterious benefactor has done to the girl. Raige has a really dark tone, but it didn't quite land with me. Feeling a little edgy for edgy's sake. It could probably have stood to spend more time fleshing out the world and the characters so we can empathize with their actions, even if we don't condone them. On a gameplay front, I found the walking speed to be a little too slow. I think the lack of fidelity works in the game's favor. It leaves a lot to the imagination, for better and for worse. For better, because it allows you to fill in the blanks with worse things than it could likely deliver on, and for worse, because it doesn't even deliver on the things to be, like, exploitative. The game is out on Steam right now for like $3, and I am curious if the complete experience does a better job with tackling the subject and fleshing things out, but based on the demo, I'd be worried it's just more of the same. Reki Rumble by Tatsoni is a sledding game where you race an opponent down a hill trying to perform more tricks than them. There's a whole gaggle of options. You can hit them, defend their hits, grind rails, get big air on ramps, but at the end of the day, all you need to do to win is jump and spin and nothing else. It's not really fun, and it also killed my joints. A shame the gameplay is lacking because the art is really cute and the plot has a wholesome air to it. I did try to meet this game on its terms before cheesing it, but even if you couldn't just jump and spin to win, the isometric camera keeps you from seeing ahead enough to give you ample time to react. The feedback if you hit a ramp or are grinding could be stronger too, and when you do, it doesn't really feel like the payout is worth the trouble. So I guess it's all to say that this game's really cute, but like it isn't quite there yet. Scout's Honor by James Hellowell. It's a cute little jam game made for the DreadX Alien Jam that took place right in the middle of the demo disc submission window. It has this narrator that directs you from task to task, giving the game a lot of charm. Pretty harmless Boy Scout at a new home type stuff until nightfall, where you're tasked with finding 5 firewood. However, there's only 4 in the yard. Luckily, a friendly alien tosses you your 5th stick, and you can light your fire. Unfortunately, they ask you to help them with their ship, and even though they give stranger danger vibes, you agree, following them into the dark woods behind your house. The tension is very high as you anticipate something is going to confront you, and you'll have to remember the path home while being chased. At least until the lights from their craft peek through, and the higher visibility makes you feel some semblance of safe. You walk into the light only to find an alien puppet against a car, and then the narrator delivers his final line.
He never even realized I was standing right behind him.
This could have been an interesting first act that led into an escape room stealth game where like Jimmy has to escape the narrator's dwelling, but to my understanding, there's no intention of that. The experience is as it stands, and as it stands is complete. And not being a demo, it didn't really belong on the demo disc, but it was a great jam entry. Shell Shock by Other Server feels like it was heavily inspired by Amnesia the Bunker, the World War I setting, the wind-up flashlight, you know, stuff like that. But unlike the Bunker, Shell Shock doesn't really seem to have monsters, just rats and dogs and Mr. Glowy Eyes. The game looks good and plays pretty alright, but it's a death by 1,000 cuts scenario. Even though I looked at the controls when I started, I guess I glossed over the lighter in inventory, so I had no clue I had lights for that first tunnel where you're supposed to get your gun. I skip over it to this little area that is stocked with rifles and pistols, but I can't grab any of those. I didn't figure out I could pull open my bag until I grabbed the gun and realized it didn't just pop up automatically. The poster telling you to equip was helpful. It pushed me to look at the controls again, but I think if there was an inventory button in the journal, or maybe even a tab that opened the inventory and then there was a book in there that opened the journal, or maybe the journal could be escape, I don't know. But that was the first hiccup. Once I had my gun equipped, I could unlock the door that led to the rat basement where I was introduced to combat. Combat's fine, but it does make me worry about what you would do when you're out of ammo. The rat basement has 2 paths, one blocked by a swarm of rats and the other blocked by debris. There's also a locked door, and the game teases you with the key, and you see a door behind the key, so you're like, oh, I probably have to dissuade the rat swarm and to walk around and get the key. But no, you actually have to crawl under this shelf, but you don't think you can when looking at it because of the small boxes in the way. So I did a lot of wandering and backtracking before trying to push through out of desperation. Then I got to meet Mr. Glowy Eyes, and I was creeped out for a moment, but he was actually kind of chill. It almost felt like a glitch. From there you meet dogs, the second combat enemy, and they're way faster and take way more to put down, but they're not really scary. After some wandering around in the dog basement, the demo kind of just ends. The demo could have really used like a stinger or a cliffhanger, some promise of what's to come and what more there is to see. Based on what I played here, there's a really good foundation. I do like the physicality of the menus, though I wish the animations for opening and closing them was faster, but I don't really know what the game wants to do or what it wants to say. There's a lot of room for World War I trench survival horrors, and this game has potential, it just needs some more juice. Unreel Fishing by M.E.A.T Studios is a fishing game where the fishing is a rhythm minigame, which sounds fun, but it's plagued by performance issues that cause a lot of dropped frames, which causes you to miss button presses. And if you miss too many, you lose a life. And if you lose all your lives, it's game over, and you lose all your progress, because it's a roguelite. The game has a simple core loop where you fish, and then you can sell or cook them. Whichever you choose, you'll end up getting buffs, and these buffs are random and sometimes even have debuffs. But these buffs are the only way to really increase your stats, and it is a long and slow road to improve. For me, a big fun factor of roguelites is becoming OP with broken builds, but I don't really feel like the upgrades boosted my fishing abilities at all. Though, in the game's defense, I only really ever managed to get +2 in any stat before something went wrong. I played 2 builds of this. The first one was really bad, but they made a lot of changes that greatly improved the game. It still had performance issues, it still doesn't have great feedback, but it was a big step in the right direction. Unfortunately, those surface level problems were just kind of masking a much worse problem, and that was that the game just isn't fun. I think there's potential for it to be fun, but the systems at play here clash a little too harshly. Because as it stands, it's a really slow-paced roguelite. I think my longest run was 30 minutes, and that was mostly because I kept getting trapped under the water when I started to explore. If I was making this game, I'd either choose for it to be a roguelite and make things faster, or keep the slow and steady pace and add a save system. Because either way, I think this game could be nice and short 15 to 30 minute bites, but right now it feels like it asks hours out of you in a single session, and I couldn't handle that. Video Geist 98 by Moristar is, to my understanding, an observation duty type game, but I never played observation duty, so my frame of reference is like if Five Nights at Freddy's core gameplay loop was Spot the Difference. Basically, you set up cameras at a house, the ghosts move and change things, and then you click on them like, you better put that thing back or so help me. If you fail to catch something though, it drains your battery, and if your battery runs out, you get godded. The core gameplay loop is pretty good, if not a little esoteric. I never really understood how long I had to find the difference before taking damage. It can be a little frustrating to be flipping through, not seeing anything, but you're taking damage because it spawned in the cam that you had just looked at right before you clicked away. So it's just kind of been sitting there while you're checking the other 5 cams. But to me, the big problem with the game is pacing. Night 1 in particular is atrocious. It's really slow and boring. And then when I died, because I didn't quite understand how the game worked yet, and I think what killed me is I didn't remember that this painting used to be blue, and so it drained me dead. I almost kind of quit right there, just gonna make the review based on that, but I did want to give this a fair shake. So I went back in with a better understanding of what I'm doing, and so I managed to beat Night 1, which got me to the much better Night 2, which unlocks a 5th room, and the spooks felt like they happened at a better pace, and for a moment things felt like they were happening back to back, and that's when the game was fun and tense, but then it slows back down, and I spent a bunch of time looking for anomalies that just aren't happening. I think if this game was just a timed Spot the Difference, where every interval had something to find before it hit or missed, and then reset to find a new thing where the challenge ramping up was more rooms being added on, it could be great. Suppose it could keep the challenging of some anomalies being subtle, like this upside down cross on this busy wallpaper, but I was less fond of that myself. We ended up getting 2 observation duty style games in the demo disc like roster, and while one of them got pushed forward by the other curators who said it was a better observation duty style game, between the 2, I like this one better. Having that battery there was really nice compared to just the sudden like game over, you failed to find the anomalies. I also liked that it was simpler and like easier to find anomalies as opposed to the other one where they were like much more subtle. When there is a full Video Geist 98, I might be inclined to play it, where I never really want to touch the other one again. Volutas by Grimnar is something I've seen a lot of whips of in the Haunted PS1 server. They do a lot of cool shader stuff in there, like this fence, for example. If I recall, it's actually just a texture, but the shader is faking its depth. It's like wizardry to me, but very cool. Unfortunately, the demo itself didn't have anything to do but look around. Even this big fish is just kind of chilling. The aesthetics of the map are very interesting, and the movement feels good enough, but it's hard to judge the game without its core loop, or I've heard this is supposed to be more exploration focused, but I think they do intend there to be shooting like Quake. Either way, the water isn't implemented yet, so all roads just lead to dead ends. Still, one day this will be cooked up, and I'm really excited to see it then. The Will of Beasts by The World's Cutest Gamers is a strange beast. It's the roughest gem I think I've played in this slot. You play a magician, the world's greatest magician, 2 parts magic, 1 part absolute drip, and you're here to, make a viral video? A little bit weak of a reason to be here, but whatever. Things go wrong, and you have to do some light exploration about it. This game has very strong writing, though the actors are pulling a lot of that weight with their deliveries.
It's blue whale.
Great work! Isn't it easier when you actually go and do what I say instead of being a little shit?
Did he just swear?
It was the 80s. You were allowed to swear at kids. The original version had a lot more swearing and racism.
The writing and characterizations are just so strong that it pushes you past what is otherwise a really jank game. Example, during this boss fight when I died, the pillars don't come back, and eventually for some reason, I got pushed out of the map, which killed all of my progress, and I wasn't about to play through the whole demo again when I was so close to the end, or at least what seemed like a natural end to a demo. The camera feels a little low to the ground, and the movement never feels right. You can run half the time, and half the time you can't. If you deal damage to a downed enemy, they'll get back up. Sometimes things are just missing from cutscenes. Like when you're introduced to the Quiz character, but what's there is a gray box. And at first I thought, oh, they just didn't have the art ready. But no, later you see the character on the stage, so they just kind of forgot to put it here. And the model for the main character doesn't match up with the hands and the first-person parts. I'll reiterate that this game is rough! Could use a lot more time being polished up, but the writing is super charming, and I'd be interested to see this again later down the line. Yards by XYX Games is a game where you are dropped into a procedurally generated suburb and must wander its streets until you pass out of dehydration or get gutted by fence creatures. Technically, your goal is to find your car to escape, but after 2 attempts and 20 minutes of slowly walking up and down the aisles systematically, I came to the conclusion that there was no car. Well, maybe there was, but no one has ever found it. Well, actually, you're not even looking for your car. I spoke to the dev, and it turns out you're looking for a door. A particular type of door that looks different than all the other doors. But that didn't come to me naturally, and I don't think it came to anyone else naturally either. Bug-wise, the major thing I came across was the sprint button seemed to stop me dead. It's one of those demos where you're not really sure what more the developer would plan to add to make it more complete. Well, that was all the demos that didn't make it past round 1. That's 27 down, 43 to go. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this barrage of just game after game after game. From what I heard, most of the devs took the news of not getting on the disc pretty well, and were very excited to get free feedback. And I hope this extra piece of feedback that I'm leaving here is helpful to all of the devs, if nothing else. Just because we didn't see them on this demo disc doesn't mean we might not see them in a later demo disc. There was plenty here that I'd be very excited to see make a return. Anyway, thank you for joining me on this long, long journey. And if you're interested in supporting what I do around here and have the means, I have a Ko-fi, but I'm also just happy to get comments and likes and subscribes. Next time I see you, it'll probably be for round 2. And until then, keep dreaming.